Hi, my name is Bart Weyand. I'm going to read two short stories today written by Dorothy Parker. She was a feminist writer in the 1920s, 30s, 40s who wrote a lot of criticism. Was a critic, satirist, poet, short story writer, essay writer. Very famous. And she joined the Algonquin Literary Circle, the Algonquin Hotel in New York City, in Manhattan. She was one of the only female writers in that whole group of men in the 1920s. She was born in 1893 and she died in 1967. The first story I'm going to read is called The Standard of Living, which was written in September 20th, 1941. Anyway, The Standard of Living is a story about two young women who live in New York City, and they are, the theme is really materialism, escapism, etc., but it's quite funny. Anyway, The Standard of Living. Annabelle and Midge came out of the tea room with the arrogant, slow gait of the leisured, for their Saturday afternoon stretched ahead of them. They had lunched, as was their wont, on sugar, starches, oils, and butterfats. Usually they ate sandwiches of spongy new white bread, greased with butter and mayonnaise. They ate thick wedges of cake, lying wet beneath ice cream, and whipped cream, and melted chocolate, gritty with nuts. As alternates, they ate patties, sweating beads of inferior oil, containing bits of bland meat bogged in pale, stiffening sauce. They ate pastries, limber under rigid icing, filled with an indeterminate yellow sweet stuff, not still solid, not yet liquid, like salve that has been left in the sun. They chose no other sort of food, nor did they consider it, and their skin was like the petals of wood anemones, and their bellies were as flat and their flanks as lean as those of young Indian braves. Annabelle and Midge had been best friends almost from the day that Midge had found a job as stenographer with the firm that employed Annabelle. By now, Annabelle, 2 years longer in the stenographic department, had worked up to the wages of $18.50 a week. Midge was still at $16. Each girl lived at home with her family and paid half her salary to its support. The girls sat side by side at their desks. They lunched together every noon. Together they set out for home at the end of the day's work. Many of their evenings and most of their Sundays were passed in each other's company. Often they were joined by two young men, but there was no steadiness to any such quartet. The two young men would give place, unlamented, to two other young men, and lament would have been inappropriate, really, since the newcomers were scarcely distinguishable from their predecessors. Invariably, the girls spent the fine idle hours of their hot weather Saturday afternoon together. Constant use had not worn ragged the fabric of their friendship. They looked alike, though the resemblance did not lie in their features. It was in the shape of their bodies, their movements, their style, and their adornments. Annabelle and Midge did, and completely all that young office workers are besought not to do. They painted their lips and their nails. They darkened their lashes and lightened their hair, and scent seemed to shimmer from them. They wore thin, bright dresses, tight over their breasts and high on their legs, and tilted slippers fancifully strapped. They looked conscious and cheap and charming. Now, as they walked across to Fifth Avenue with their skirts swirled by the hot wind, they received audible admiration. Young men grouped lethargically about newsstands, awarded them murmurs, exclamations, even the ultimate tribute, whistles. Annabelle and Midge passed without the condescension of hurrying their pace. They held their heads higher, and set their feet with exquisite precision, as if they stepped over the necks of peasants. Always the girls went to walk on Fifth Avenue on their free afternoons, for it was the ideal ground for their favorite game. The game could be played anywhere, and indeed was, but the great shop windows stimulated the two players to their best form. Annabel had invented the game, or rather, she had evolved it from an old one. Basically, it was no more than the ancient sport of what would you do if you had $1 million. But Annabel had drawn a new set of rules for it, had narrowed it, pointed it, made it stricter. Like all games, it was the more absorbing for being more difficult. Annabel's version went like this. You must suppose that someone dies and leaves you $1 million. Cool. But there is a condition to the bequest. It is stated in the will that you must spend every nickel of the money on yourself. There lay the hazard of the game. If, when playing it, you forgot and listed among your expenditures the rental of a new apartment for your family, for example, you lost your turn to the other player. It was astonishing how many, and some of them among experts too, would forfeit all their innings by such slips. It was essential, of course, that it be played in passionate seriousness. Each purchase must be carefully considered and, if necessary, supported by argument. There was no zest to playing wildly. Once, Annabel had introduced the game to Sylvia, another girl who worked in the office. She explained the rules to Sylvia and then offered her the gambit. What would be the first thing you'd do? Sylvia had not shown the decency of even a second of hesitation. Well, she said, the first thing I'd do, I'd go out and hire somebody to shoot Mrs. Gary Cooper. And then, so it is to be seen that she was no fun. But Annabel and Midge were surely born to be comrades, for Midge played the game like a master from the moment she learned it. It was she who added the touches that made the whole thing cozier. According to Midge's innovations, the eccentric who died and left you the money was not anybody you loved, or for that matter, anybody you even knew. It was somebody who had seen you somewhere and thought, that girl ought to have lots of nice things. I'm going to leave her $1 million when I die. And the death was to be neither untimely nor painful. Your benefactor, full of years and comfortably ready to depart, was to slip softly away during sleep and go right to heaven. These embroideries permitted Annabel and Midge to play their game in the luxury of peaceful consciences. Midge played with a seriousness that was not only proper, but extreme. The single strain on the girl's friendship had followed an announcement once made by Annabel that the first thing she would buy with her $1 million would be a silver fox coat. It was as if she had struck Midge across the mouth. When Midge recovered her breath, she cried that she couldn't imagine how Annabel could do such a thing. Silver fox coats were common. Annabel defended her taste with the retort that they were not common either. Midge then said that they were so. She added that everybody had a silver fox coat. She went on with perhaps a slight toss of the head to declare that she herself wouldn't be caught dead in silver fox. For the next few days, though the girls saw each other as constantly, their conversation was careful and infrequent, and they did not once play their game. Then, one morning, as soon as Annabel entered the office, she came to Midge and said that she had changed her mind. She would not buy a silver fox coat with any part of her $1 million. Immediately on receiving the legacy, she would select a coat of mink. Midge smiled, and her eyes shone. I think, she said, you're doing absolutely the right thing. Now, as they walked along Fifth Avenue, they played the game anew. It was one of those days with which September is repeatedly cursed, hot and glaring with slivers of dust in the wind. People drooped and shambled, but the girls carried themselves tall and walked a straight line as befitted young heiresses on their afternoon promenade. There was no longer need for them to start the game at its formal opening. Annabel went to the heart of it. "All right," she said. "So you've got this $1 million. So what would be the first thing you'd do?" "Well, the first thing I'd do," Midge said, "I'd get a mink coat." But she said it mechanically, as if she were giving the memorized answer to an expected question. "Yes," Annabel said, "I think you ought to. The terribly dark kind of mink." But she too spoke as if by rote. It was too hot. Fur, no matter how dark and sleek and supple, was horrid to the thoughts. They stepped along in silence for a while. Then Midge's eye was caught by a shop window. Cool, lovely gleamings were there, set off by chaste and elegant darkness. "No," Midge said, "I take it back. I wouldn't get a mink coat the first thing. You know what I'd do? I'd get a string of pearls, real pearls." Annabel's eyes turned to follow Midge's. "Yes," she said slowly, "I think that's kind of a good idea. And it would make sense, too, because you can wear pearls with anything." Together they went over to the shop window and stood pressed against it. It contained but one object, a double row of great, even pearls clasped by a deep emerald around a little pink velvet throat. "What do you suppose they cost?" Annabel said. "Gee, I don't know," Midge said. "Plenty, I guess." "Like $1,000? Annabel said. "Oh, I guess like more," Midge said, "on account of the emerald." "Well, like $10,000? Annabel said. "Gee, I wouldn't even know," Midge said. The devil nudged Annabel in the ribs. "Dare you to go in and price them," she said. "Like fun," Midge said. "Dare you," Annabel said. "Why, a little store like this wouldn't even be open this afternoon," Midge said. "Yes, it is, too," Annabel said. "People just came out, and there's a doorman. Dare you?" "Well," Midge said, "but you've got to come, too." They rendered thanks icily to the doorman for ushering them into the shop. It was cool and quiet, a broad, gracious room with paneled walls and soft carpet. But the girls wore expressions of bitter disdain, as if they stood in a sty. A slim, immaculate clerk came to them and bowed. His neat face showed no astonishment at their appearance. "Good afternoon," he said. He implied that he would never forget it if they would grant him the favor of accepting his soft-spoken greeting. "Good afternoon," Annabel, and Midge said together, and in like freezing accents. "Is there something?" the clerk said. "Oh, we were just looking," Annabel said. It was as if she flung the words down from a dais. The clerk bowed. "My friend and myself merely happened to be passing," Midge said, and stopped, seeming to listen to the phrase. "My friend here and myself," she went on, "merely happened to be wondering how much are those pearls you've got in your window." "Ah, yes," said the clerk, "the double rope. That is $250,000, madam." "I see," Midge said. The clerk bowed. An exceptionally beautiful necklace," he said. "Would you care to look at it?" "No, thank you," Annabel said. "My friend and myself merely happened to be passing," Midge said. They turned to go from their manor where the tumbrel awaited them. The clerk sprang ahead and opened the door. He bowed as they swept by him. The girls went along the avenue, and disdain was still on their faces. "Honestly," Annabel said, "can you imagine a thing like that?" $250,000, Midge said. "That's $250,000 right there." "He's got his nerve," Annabel said. They walked on. Slowly the disdain went, slowly and completely, as if drained from them, and with it went the regal carriage and tread. Their shoulders dropped, and they dragged their feet. They bumped against each other without notice or apology, and caromed away again. They were silent, and their eyes were cloudy. Suddenly Midge straightened her back, flung her head high, and spoke clear and strong. "Listen, Annabelle," she said. "Look. Suppose there was this terribly rich person, see? You don't know this person, but this person has seen you somewhere and wants to do something for you. Well, it's a terribly old person, see? And so this person dies, just like going to sleep, and leaves you $10 million. Now, what would be the first thing you'd do?" End of story. That's the end of the first story. The second story I'm going to read is a little bit shorter. It's called Arrangements in Black and White. It was written in October 8th, 1927. I have to preface this story is there are a couple times they use the it's about racism, race, and the black refers to Negroes, and the N word is used a couple times in it. So it may be a little bit. People might not enjoy that very much to hear it, but I have to use it in the reading. So this is called Arrangement in Black and White. The woman with the pink velvet puppies twined around the assisted gold of her hair traversed the crowded room at an interesting gait, combining a skip with a sidle, and clutched the lean arm of her host. "Now I got you," she said. "Now you can't get away." "Why, hello," said her host. "Well, how are you?" "Oh, I'm finely," she said. "Just simply finely. Listen, I want you to do the most terrible favor, will you? Will you please? Pretty please?" "What is it?" said the host. "Listen," she said. "I want to meet Walter Williams. Honestly, I'm just simply crazy about that man. Oh, when he sings those spirituals. Well, I said to Burton, 'It's a good thing for you Walter Williams is colored,' I said, 'or you'd have lots of reason to be jealous. I'd really love to meet him. I'd like to tell him I've heard him sing. Will you be an angel and introduce me to him?" "Why, certainly," said her host. "I thought you'd met him. The party's for him. Where is he, anyway?" "He's over there by the bookcase," she said. "Let's wait till those people get through talking to him. Well, I think you're simply marvelous, giving this perfectly marvelous party for him and having him meet all these white people and all. Isn't he terribly grateful?" "I hope not," said her host. "I think it's really terribly nice," she said. "I do. I don't see why on earth it isn't perfectly all right to meet colored people. I haven't any feeling at all about it. Not one single bit. Burton, oh, he's just the other way. Well, you know, he comes from Virginia, and you know how they are." "Did he come tonight?" said her host. "No, he couldn't," she said. "I'm a regular grass widow tonight. I told him when I left. 'There's no telling what I'll do,' I said. He was just so tired out he couldn't move. Isn't it a shame?" "Ah," said her host. "Well, wait till I meet him. Wait till I tell him I met Walter Williams," she said. "He'll just about die. Oh, we have more arguments about colored people. I talk to him like I don't know what. I get so excited. Oh, don't be so silly, I say. But I must say, for Burton, he's heaps broader-minded than lots of these Southerners. He's awfully fond of colored people. Well, he says himself he really wouldn't have white servants. And you know, he had this old colored nurse, this regular old nigger mammy, and he just simply loves her. Why, every time he goes home, he goes out in the kitchen to see her. He does, really, to this day. All he says is, he hasn't got a word to say against colored people as long as they keep their place. He's always doing things for them, like giving them clothes and I don't know what all. The only thing he says he wouldn't sit down at the table with one for $1 million. Oh, I say to him, you make me sick talking like that. I'm just terrible to him. Aren't I terrible? Oh, no, said the host. No. I am, she said. I know I am. Poor Burton. Now me, I don't feel that way at all. I haven't the slightest feeling about colored people. Why, I'm just crazy about some of them. They're just like children. Just as easygoing, always singing and laughing and everything. Aren't they the happiest things you ever saw in your life? Honestly, it makes me laugh just to hear them. Oh, I like them. I really do. Well, now, listen to me. Well, now, listen. I have this colored laundress. I've had her for years, and I'm devoted to her. She's a real character. And I want to tell you, I think of her as my friend. That's the way I think of her. As I say to Burton, well, for heaven's sake, we're all human beings, aren't we? Yes, said her host. Yes, indeed. Now, this Walter Williams, she said, I think a man like that's a real artist. I do. I think he deserves an awful lot of credit. Goodness, I'm so crazy about music or anything. I don't care what color he is. I honestly think if a person's an artist, nobody ought to have any feeling at all about meeting them. That's absolutely what I say to Burton. Don't you think I'm right? Yes, said her host. Oh, yes. That's the way I feel, she said. I just can't understand people being narrow-minded. Well, I absolutely think it's a privilege to meet a man like Walter Williams. Yes, I do. I haven't any feeling at all. Well, my goodness, the good Lord made him just the same as he did any of us, didn't he? That's what I say, she said. Yes, surely, her host. Yes, said her host. Yes, indeed. That's what I say, she said. Oh, I get so furious when people are narrow-minded about colored people. It's just all I can do not to say something. Of course, I do admit, when you get a bad colored man, they're simply terrible. But as I say to Burton, there are some bad white people, too, in this world, aren't there? I guess there are, said her host. Why, really, I'd really be glad to have a man like Walter Williams come to my house and sing for us sometime, she said. Of course, I couldn't ask him on account of Burton, but I wouldn't have any feeling about it at all. Oh, can't he sing? Isn't it marvelous the way they all have music in them? It seems to be right in them. Come on, let's go over and talk to him. Listen, what shall I do when I'm introduced? Ought I to shake hands or what? Why, do whatever you want, said her host. I guess maybe I'd better, she said. I wouldn't for the world have him think I had any feeling. I think I'd better shake hands, just the way I would with anybody else. That's just exactly what I'll do. They reached the tall young Negro standing by the bookcase. The host performed introductions. The Negro bowed. How do you do, he said. The woman with the pink velvet poppies extended her hand at the length of her arm and held it so for all the world to see, until the Negro took it, shook it, and gave it back to her. Oh, how do you do, Mr. Williams, she said. Well, how do you do? I've just been saying I've enjoyed your singing so awfully much. I've been to your concerts, and we have you on the phonograph and everything. Oh, I just enjoy it. She spoke with great distinctness, moving her lips meticulously, as if in parlance with the deaf. I'm so glad, he said. I'm so glad, he said. I'm just simply crazy about that water boy thing you sing, she said. Honestly, I can't get it out of my head. I have my husband nearly crazy, the way I go around humming it all the time. Oh, he looks just as black as the ace of... Well, tell me, where on earth do you get all those songs of yours? How do you ever get hold of them? Why, he said, there are so many different... I should think you'd love singing them, she said. It must be more fun. All those darling old spirituals, oh, I just love them. Well, what are you doing? What are you doing now? Are you keeping up your singing? Why don't you have another concert sometime? Well, I'm having one on the 16th of this month, he said. Well, I'll be there, she said. I'll be there if I possibly can. You can count on me. Goodness, here comes a whole raft of people to talk to you. You're just a regular guest of honor. Oh, who's that girl in white? I've seen her someplace. That's Catherine Burke, said her host. Good heavens, she said. Is that Catherine Burke? Why, she looks entirely different off the stage. I thought she was much better looking. I had no idea she was so terribly dark. Why, she looks almost like... Oh, I think she's a wonderful actress. Don't you think she's a wonderful actress, Mr. Williams? Oh, I think she's marvelous, don't you? Yes, I do, he said. "Oh, I do too," she said. "Just wonderful." "Well, goodness, we must give someone else a chance to talk to the guest of honor. Now, don't forget, Mr. Williams, I'm going to be at that concert if I possibly can. I'll be there applauding like everything. And if I can't come, I'm going to tell everybody I know to go. Anyway, don't you forget." "I won't," he said. "Thank you so much." The host took her arm and piloted her into the next room. "Oh, my dear," she said, "I nearly died, honestly. I give you my word, I nearly passed away. Did you hear that terrible break I made? I was just going to say Catherine Burke looked almost like a nigger. I just caught myself in time. Oh, do you think he noticed?" "I don't believe so," said her host. "Well, thank goodness," she said, "because I wouldn't have embarrassed him for anything. Why, he's awfully nice, just as nice as he can be. Nice manners and everything. You know, so many colored people, you give them an inch and they walk all over you. But he doesn't try any of that. Well, he's got more sense, I suppose. He's really nice. Don't you think so?" "Yes," said her host. "I liked him," she said. "I haven't any feeling at all because he's a colored man. I felt just as natural as I would with anybody. Talked to him just as naturally and everything. But honestly, I could hardly keep a straight face. I kept thinking of Burton. Oh, wait till I tell Burton I called him Mister." End of story.